I have spent 23 years teaching people how to think about nothingness. Heidegger's void. Sartre's nausea before the abyss. The Buddhist concept of shunyata, the emptiness that underlies all form. I have assigned these texts to thousands of students. I have written papers on them. I have debated them at conferences in front of people who dedicated their entire careers to the same questions. None of us knew what we were talking about. What do you actually know about nothingness? Not as an idea, not as a philosophical construct, but as a place you have actually been? My name is Thomas. I'm 47 years old. I am a professor of existential philosophy at a university I'd rather not name, for reasons that will become obvious. 3 years ago, my heart stopped for 3 minutes during a routine cardiac procedure. And in those 3 minutes, I went somewhere that every philosopher in history has written about. And not one of them got right. By the end of this video, you will understand why what I found in that void is the most important thing I have ever learned, and why it will haunt me, productively, gratefully haunt me, for the rest of my life. Before I tell you what happened to me, I want to give you the intellectual context. Because I think it matters, and because I think you deserve to understand why what I experienced is not just personally significant, but philosophically extraordinary. In 2023, a team of neuroscientists at the University of Michigan published a study in the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. They monitored the brains of 4 unconscious, dying patients and found surges of gamma wave activity, the brain waves associated with our highest states of conscious awareness, immediately after the heart stopped. In other words, at the precise moment when, by every external measure, the brain should be going dark, something was turning on. I read that study the week it was published. I filed it under interesting but inconclusive and moved on to preparing a seminar on Schopenhauer's will to live. 2 months later, I was in a hospital bed with electrodes on my chest, scheduled for an ablation procedure to correct an arrhythmia I'd been ignoring for years. A complication during the procedure caused my heart to stop. For 3 minutes, I was, by every clinical definition, absent from this world. What I found in those 3 minutes demolished 47 years of intellectual certainty in a way that 23 years of philosophy never could. I want to describe what I experienced as carefully as I possibly can, because I am aware that language is a tool built for the world of form, and what I am attempting to describe is its complete absence. The first thing I became aware of was the disappearance of the body. Not pain, not departure, disappearance. As if the body had never been the point. As if it were a coat I had been wearing so long I'd forgotten I had it on, and someone had simply, gently removed it. And then, the void. I want to be precise about what I mean by this word. Not darkness. Darkness implies the absence of light, which still implies a space in which light could exist. This was the absence of space itself. No dimension, no direction, no texture, no temperature, no sound, nothing. And I, whatever I was in that moment, whatever the word I means, when stripped of a body, a name, a history, a career, a set of opinions, I was still there, aware, present, undeniably, irrefutably conscious. I have taught Sartre's concept of le néant, the nothingness, as the fundamental ground of human freedom. The void, for Sartre, is terrifying precisely because it confronts us with the absence of predetermined meaning. We are condemned to be free, he wrote, thrown into a void from which we must construct ourselves. I expected terror. I expected the existential vertigo I had spent decades describing to students. What I found was the opposite. The void was not empty in the way Sartre meant. It was not a lack. It was not an absence of something that should have been there. It was, and I have turned this word over in my mind for 3 years before committing to it. It was a fullness, a stillness so complete that it could only be described as pregnant, as if everything that had ever existed or ever would exist was held there in potential, in the way that a single seed contains, somehow, an entire forest. It was not the void the philosophers described. It was something they were reaching for and missed. Remember what I promised you at the beginning, why what I found would haunt me forever. We are there now. This is the moment that changed everything. In the void, in the absolute absence of everything, I became aware of something I can only call a presence, not a figure, not a voice, not a light. A presence the way mathematics is a presence, not visible, not audible, but undeniably, structurally real. Something that was not me, and was not nothing, and had been there long before I arrived. And this presence communicated, not in language, in something prior to language, in the way that understanding sometimes arrives before the words do. Direct, complete, unambiguous. What it communicated was this: consciousness is not what the brain produces. Consciousness is what the universe is made of. The brain is how it learns to look at itself. I want to be careful here because I am an academic and I understand the difference between a revelation and an argument. This was not an argument. I could not interrogate it. I could not demand its citations. It arrived the way the ground arrives when you stop falling, not as a proposition to be evaluated, but as a fact to be absorbed. And in that moment, 23 years of professional skepticism did not crumble dramatically. It simply became irrelevant. The way a map becomes irrelevant when you are already standing in the place it described. The void took something from me that I did not expect to lose and did not expect to be glad about losing. It took my certainty, not my doubt. Philosophers are comfortable with doubt. My certainty. The quiet, deeply held conviction that I already understood the structure of reality well enough to teach it to others. The professional confidence of a man who has built an identity around having thought more carefully than most people about the deepest questions. The void showed me that intellectual mastery of a question is not the same as an encounter with it. You can map the ocean perfectly and still not know what it feels like to drown. What it gave me was wonder, not the cultivated intellectual wonder of a philosopher examining a difficult problem. The raw, undefended wonder of a child who has just seen something they have no category for, something that makes the world larger instead of more organized. I came back, and came back is the right phrase. There was a distinct and physical sensation of return, of being pulled back across some threshold, with the absolute conviction that the most honest thing I could say about consciousness, about existence, about death was simply, I do not know. And that not knowing is not a failure of inquiry. It is the beginning of one. I woke up on the table with a cardiologist saying my name in the careful, deliberate way that people speak to someone they are not yet sure is fully back. I was back, but I was not the same man who had left. In the weeks after I returned, I did something I had not done in perhaps 15 years. I sat in my office, not to work, not to read, not to prepare anything, and I simply sat. I sat with the not knowing, and I found it was not the terrifying abyss I had been professionally describing for 2 decades. It was spacious. It was, and I choose this word with full awareness of its philosophical weight, it was generative. I rewrote my introductory philosophy course from the ground up. I removed a lecture I had given every year for a decade titled The Certainty of Uncertainty, because I realized, with some embarrassment, that it was not actually about uncertainty. It was about my certainty that I understood uncertainty, a distinction that sounds trivial until you've spent 3 minutes somewhere that made the difference undeniable. I also told my students what happened to me. Not in the first class, not as a centerpiece, but at the end of a seminar on consciousness, when a student asked me what I actually believed rather than what the literature said. I told her, I believe consciousness does not end. I cannot prove it. I cannot publish it in the form that would satisfy a peer reviewer. But I have been there, and I know. The class was silent for a long time. Then, every single student started talking at once. I still teach philosophy. I still assign Heidegger and Sartre and the Buddhists. They were reaching for something real, all of them. I have more respect for them now than I did before, precisely because I understand how hard the reach was and how close some of them came. But I teach them differently now. I teach them as maps drawn by people who never visited the territory but somehow intuited its shape. Remarkable maps. Incomplete maps. What haunts me, and I use that word deliberately, because hauntings are not always malevolent, is not what I saw in the void. It is what the void showed me about this life. That consciousness is not a byproduct of matter. That we are not brains that learn to think. We are awareness that learn to have a body. And when the body is done, the awareness continues into something that 3 minutes in the void convinced me is not emptiness at all. The void is not nothing. That is the thing that will haunt me gratefully forever. The void is not nothing. I want to ask you something that I genuinely don't know the answer to, which, I'll admit, is a feeling I've had to relearn how to tolerate. What do you believe consciousness is? Is it something the brain produces and therefore ends when the brain does? Or is it something larger, something the brain simply tunes into for the duration of a life? Leave your answer in the comments. I read everyone, and I respond to more than you might expect. And if you know someone who is grappling with these questions, a student, a skeptic, someone you hope has lost someone and is searching for a framework that doesn't require them to abandon their intelligence, send them this video. Because sometimes what we need is not an answer. It's permission to take the question seriously. Subscribe to NDE Revealed, where the most important questions get the serious attention they deserve. Until next time, stay curious, stay open, and remember, the void is not nothing.